This was my third time through the work chapter of Authenblissity Reset, and it was my favorite time. I had so much fun with this chapter this time around, and I think it's because I chose inner work as my type of work. In the past, I've focused mainly on paid work and with a little bit of creative work added in, but this time around, my mindset had completely shifted. I think because I have done the reset a couple of times already and I was looking for a different approach. So choosing inner work was my big aha moment that happened right at the beginning. I chose a beautiful quote from Ahime Ora, and it is very much related to the inner work that I've been doing. The quote reads, "I forgive myself for viewing someone's lack of reciprocation as a challenge to convince them of my worth." I laid out the content similarly, and I forgot to mention these blobs that I drew. I conceived of these blobs over a year ago when I was doing a month of trying to learn Procreate. So I played on Procreate for 30 days, and one of the things that I came up with were these blobs that were supposed to represent my inner critic. But now that I've used them for the work chapter, I view them more as a representation of myself, all the parts of me, all kind of like intermeshed together and all kind of like blobbing around and experimenting and trying to fit in where they can. So these blobs are all different shapes and sizes as I can be with my moods and my thoughts, my emotions. The only thing that you can see within these blobs are two eyes looking out into the world. And of course, there is a heart. Now that I've explained my doodles, let's move on to the first exercise, which is in the arrive section, the reaction exercise. I did this chapter all out of order, so I actually ended up doing the reaction exercise almost last. For some reason, I didn't want to do the reaction exercise. I considered leaving it blank, but then I thought, you know what, I'll just throw on the recording and listen to the story, see what comes up. And I was surprised that something came up immediately. In the mini memoir that's in my book, I start off with talking about how I used to answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? So I wrote that down and I started thinking, well, when I grow up, I want to be kind and joyful, compassionate, loving, confident. And I had all of these descriptors, but at the heart of it, when I grow up, I want to be myself. I want to be a fully expressed and authentic human being. And that made me a little bit emotional that I no longer think of what do I want to be when I grow up in terms of professions. And it's always been professions or jobs. That's the subtext of that question. But what if we collectively answered this question with the traits that we want to embody? In word cloud, I decided to name the different types of work that I currently do, and there were only 4 that I could think of. So one is paid work. This is my job with the writing studio. I also do housework, which encompasses cooking and cleaning, that sort of thing. There's my creative work, which is currently my blog and newsletter, YouTube, and also future creative projects, which I'm dreaming up right now. And the 4th one is the focus of this chapter, which is inner work. And within inner work, I'm reading, I'm learning, I'm doing morning pages, I do moon planning at every new moon and full moon. I do self-reflection, which is quite broad, but I'm always reflecting on things, even if I want to buy something or if I want to eat a certain thing or when I'm cleaning out my pantry. I'm always thinking, what can I learn about myself? What does this show me about myself? And of course, I am going to therapy. The pendulum exercise was interesting because I realized that inner work is the only type of work that I truly feel is a treat. Even though I enjoy my paid work now, and I even enjoy housework to a certain extent, especially if I can listen to music or a podcast while cleaning, for example. And as well, I really love creative work for the aha moments and all of that. But there's just like this excitement about doing inner work all the time. Like, what else can I learn about myself? What can I figure out today? It feels very rewarding, which was super interesting to me because I don't actually get any external rewards for it. I don't make any money from my inner work specifically, unless you count my YouTube videos or my book, but those things I view more as my creative creative work. My inner work is when I'm sitting down and I'm doing morning pages and I'm reflecting, and maybe there are some external rewards when I share my journey, but the journey itself really is for me. Even though I might feel some resistance every now and then, it's definitely something that I want to do, like fully want to do, fully committed to. Next, we move into the observe section. I observed myself for 7 days in terms of the emotions that came up surrounding my inner work. These emotions weren't necessarily about the inner work itself, although it could be, but sometimes it was a predominant emotion that came up through another area of my life that I wanted to work through. So whatever I was feeling the most that day surrounding inner work or related to inner work, that's what I ended up putting down for each of the 8 days that I did the self-observation. I wanted to do an extra day because I wanted the symmetry in my spreads, but normally I would have just done 7 days. I did 2 exercises in the explore section, incentives and curiosity. I was very eager to do the incentives exercise, even though it's laid out more for paid work in terms of the examples, but I wanted to see what was driving me to do this inner work, what incentives I was getting out of this type of work. The important factors that came up for me were autonomy or freedom to follow my interest and curiosity. The second incentive that was super important to me were the intrinsic rewards that come from feeling like I'm learning and growing as a person. And then finally, another incentive from inner work is this very flexible schedule. I can do my inner work whenever I want. There's no deadline. If I feel like taking a break, I'm not affecting any sort of end result. I can take a break and do my inner work later in the day or even the next day. There's really no pressure. It's a very flexible type of work. And then some other incentives that are not as important to me are things like money. I would love to make money from my inner work, and I talked about maybe I do kind of like on the periphery because I do YouTube videos and I talk a lot about self-reflection, but really the inner work itself, it's not important to me that I make money from it. I would still do the inner work if I wasn't recording YouTube videos and if I wasn't sharing my journey. Recognition is another thing that is not that important to me, although I have noticed that as I am doing the inner work and following my inner compass, I am experiencing my relationships in a way that is more fulfilling just by being myself more. One thing that I've noticed as I've been doing more and more personal development, I don't actually know anyone who's interested in the same thing. I would love to have a friend who I could talk about this stuff with. It's more of a nice to have for me, and it's like not that important. It won't stop me from doing my inner work on my own. The next exercise is curiosity, and I mainly wanted to do this exercise because there are a bunch of things that I want to do in inner work, and I wanted to make sure I had a record somewhere of all of the things I want to do eventually. Moving on to the connect section, with the memories exercise, I wanted to think back on my history of inner work. So this is almost like my resume of inner work, if you will. I really like the way I approached disentangling this time around, but I wouldn't say I got any real aha moments from it. I'm fully letting go of my need for external validation and my desire to be liked in the sense that they no longer affect my decisions and my behavior. The other interesting thing that came up in disentangling, just a small thing, but I realized I have a deep longing to do things that I'm proud of. So my book was a big step towards this, but I also want to make videos that I'm proud of. I want my future projects to be things that I'm proud of. So I'm starting to think about, what does that really mean to me? Am I willing to put in the effort? This is really wiggling around in my brain, so I think there's more to come on that. I had a lot of fun with perceptions and perspective because, quite frankly, I was very tired of this exercise after doing it for 9 months in 9 different areas of my life. So I wanted to switch things up and approach it a little differently. So what I did was, in perceptions, I wrote 3 quotes from my inner critic. And in perspective, I wrote down 3 quotes that I found online that really resonated with me. In interconnections, I thought about how inner work relates to each of the other areas of life. So in food, I thought about how I eat mindfully with no distractions. That in itself is a form of inner work. In money, I wrote spending with thought and intention, and so on and so forth. So through this exercise, I realized that I have found some way to incorporate inner work in all areas of my life. So I thought that was really neat. Finally, moving into the reflect section, the pendulum redux exercise was all right for me. I realized I'm very interested in the topic of inner work and there are many things I'd like to try, but I also realized that this is where I do seek advice through therapy. And that was super fascinating to me because I really don't seek advice in very many areas of my life at all. But in inner work, I find therapy is a key contributing factor to my growth. It just helps to talk to someone who has a different perspective, a perspective that comes from not knowing me personally. So I really find my therapy sessions extremely valuable. And even though I still have a lot to work through, a lot to work through, I feel pretty at peace with my inner work. I know there's no end point that needs to be reached. I'm enjoying the journey and just enjoying the process of learning more about myself. I wrote down 5 statements in the looking up exercise, and I had a hard time picking one that really resonated with me. They all resonated to a certain extent, but there wasn't one that really stood out as like, oh yes, this is the one. I ended up choosing one, but I'm a bit mad about it, so I might go back and change it. I'm not too sure yet. And then finally, the treasures exercise. It was really nice to pull out all of the nuggets that I learned about myself. And the one main thing that came out of this is that I'm really grateful for my willingness to do inner work. I know a lot of people really aren't about that. I would like to continue this journey of doing a little bit of inner work every day. It doesn't have to be a lot. For the last part of this video, I'm going to share my looking up statements from the 3 times I did the work reset. The first time was in October of 2021, and my focus was on paid work. At this time, I had 2 jobs. My looking up statement was, I see myself as someone who considers my creative projects and self-development to be my life's work. This was really interesting for me to look back on because I didn't realize I was so committed to self-development or inner work at that point in my life to the extent that I would consider it my life's work. I was really trying to shift my mindset at this time because I was so enmeshed in paid work as being the most important. And it looks like it worked. I ended up shifting my mindset. My second reset was in February of 2023, and my focus for this chapter was paid work. Still 2 jobs at this time, although I had let my project management job know that I'd be ending my contract, and I also focused on creative work. So I had a couple of different types of work as I was going through this chapter, which made it a bit confusing for me. My looking up statement was, I see myself as someone who is eager to get out of bed in the morning because I'm excited and motivated by the work I have planned for the day. I mean, who doesn't want to feel that way? And then finally, my last reset is this one that I'm doing now. And my focus was on inner work this time, my first time focusing on inner work. And my looking up statement was, I see myself as someone who is committed to doing inner work consistently and ongoingly. There is no endpoint that needs to be achieved. So this is something that's very different from my other types of work. Paid work, there's always an end point in terms of once you're done this task, it'll be finished, or once I'm done this paid job and once I've retired, it'll be done. And then with housework, there's always an end point. So it's very like do the task, get the result. And then of course, with my creative work, the end point is a blog post or a newsletter or a video. There's like a concrete deliverable. But with inner work, there is no deliverable. There's no point where I'm like, okay, I did this task and now I'm this type of person. It's always in flux. I'm always changing as a person. Sometimes things work for me, sometimes they don't. So for example, I write morning pages every day. Most times I feel better after morning pages. But if I'm feeling distressed about something, the problem doesn't go away because I've written about it. The problem is still there and I still need to work through it. So the end point or the goals or things that you achieve in inner work, they're very gray, they're very fuzzy, they're not measurable, which is something that's very different in my life. I'm very goal-oriented, so I like to measure things and I like to be able to hold up the yardstick and see how I did. But with inner work, there's no such thing. So I think even by claiming inner work as my most important work, it relates to me letting go of some part of myself that is so achievement focused. And that was a really neat realization. Actually, I do like this looking up statement. I'm going to keep it. That is going to be it for my work reset recap. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be back very soon with the community chapter, which is the second last chapter in my book. Thank you so much for following along with this journey. I will see you again very soon in my next video. Until then, please take care and bye for now.